Hello and welcome to Darshan America. We come to you from Washington, D.C. My name is Aastha Verma. Ramesh is on vacation this week, and we have in the studio Mr. Suresh Shenoy from IMC.
Thank you, Aastha. Information Management Consultants. We are based here in Reston, and I've been on this show a few times before.
It's great to have you back.
Thank you.
And I know that Ramesh and I always love to discuss politics, so I hope that you've come ready to discuss it as well.
Man, it looks like we are in a long, protracted election cycle, and Obama just made a statement this week that he feels like he's the underdog going into 2012, which is kind of a very interesting observation for a sitting president to make.
Yeah, I don't know if I bought that whole underdog thing. I think maybe what he was saying is that, he's not really getting the attention from the media as much as the Republican candidates are, because there's so much activity happening on the Republican side of this.
Well, when the president's polls slip below, in the low 40% range, he's open target for anybody to sort of run against. But, God, I'm not sure that I can take 16 months of electioneering, if you will.
I have to say I agree with you. It's already exhausting. And the thing that I found very interesting about this is if you look at the Republican lineup of candidates, you can very well see how the party is split. I mean, you've got the Tea Party people who clearly are Rick Perry supporters, but Rick Perry cannot carry the whole Republican Party. Then you have Mitt Romney, who seems to be actually doing quite well in these debates. He seems to be the emergent leader. But then again, his background and the fact that he's not really riling up that Republican base, he's not going to carry the party. So people are now waiting for someone else to come in, like a Chris Christie, who might be able to carry the whole party. I just think it means that the Republican Party is very, very fractured, and maybe that will be the one thing that works in favor for the president.
Well, I think that we are on the crossroads of probably one of the most historically important elections. If you look at the $14 trillion of debt that we have, what kind of a legacy are we planning on leaving for our children and for the next generation? This whole concept of publicly funded programs, for meeting Obama's, promise of hope, has resulted in significant debt for the country, and that's hard to sustain. And then we have at least two wars that are open, one in Iraq and one in Afghanistan, and one perhaps a covert war in maybe in Pakistan, that is draining the economy of a lot of money that we could be using elsewhere.
Well, it's interesting that you would say that to me, that the debt was the result of the president's policies. People would argue that the debt really was a problem that was created by the previous presidency, the presidency of George Bush, which got us into these wars, and that we're still paying for these, and we'll probably continue to pay for the next generation before the impact lessens on the economy.
Well, I think there is some truth to that. But I think it's also important to realize that regardless of whether it was a Republican, driven debt or whether it was perpetuated by the by a Democratic president, the fact remains that we have a huge debt to take into account. And it's not going to be easy to pay off that debt unless we cut some program somewhere. So I think the Tea Party has some interesting viewpoints on that. I think the challenge is, where does that money come from? Okay, do you tax people? The Warren Buffett tax, as Obama, calls it, or whether it is cutting programs, entitlement programs that we've been used to. That is a philosophical question, and I think this debate is very healthy from that respect.
It is healthy. I think the American public is looking for solutions, which is going to involve compromise. That's the one thing that I find very interesting about this election cycle, is you have politicians sticking to their extreme viewpoints. No one wants to come towards the center, and yet it's the country that is really waiting for solutions, which is going to have to involve compromise. It's going to have to involve all of the things you just said. It's going to have to involve cuts, probably taxes in areas that we're not comfortable and looking at, and even entitlements, the ones that we've gotten so used to having for so long that we just are afraid to make cuts in those defense programs or Social Security or Medicare, Medicaid. I thought what's happening in South Carolina is very interesting. Of course, that is the home state for Governor Nikki Haley, who, of course, we in the Indian American community have gotten to know quite a bit about.
She's been in the news, and she's doing a terrific job. There's an article in USA Today where they talk about urging the state's legislators to eliminate special retirement benefits that they get taking the strongest stand among officials in several states who add their per diems to their base salary to calculate retirement benefits. I mean, that kind of waste needs to go away. And
well,
I think
we all saw the story about the $16 muffins. I mean, the ones that just took us all by shock, right? I mean, how is it that these governments programs can afford to spend so much on these kinds of frivolous, I would say, add-on accessories when the rest of the country is hurting so much? And to that point, folks, if you've been paying attention to the newspapers, be it the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, you're starting to see much more about protests. You know, we've seen protests happen here in the Middle East. You see a young population that really doesn't have jobs, doesn't have a future ahead of it, so they protest. And those protests have actually been quite successful overseas. And to some degree, we feel happy that they're happening over there and not happening here on home turf. That is not true anymore, folks. The Wall Street Journal just did a story about Wall Street protests, which are now becoming a phenomenon across the country in cities like LA that aren't even near Wall Street. But what are these folks protesting? Well, they're basically young protesters. Once again, these are folks that are having a hard time finding a job. One of the grievances cites bank executives, those that received exorbitant bonuses, especially after getting these taxpayer bailouts during the financial crisis. So you wonder, you know, what's wrong with our society that we would reward these bank executives that got us into this mess in the first place? Others grievances would be things like negligence, the ones that strip employees of their right to negotiate for better pay. We've seen this happen in Wisconsin, where the rights of the collective unions to bargain collectively have started to erode. This is a dangerous pattern. And so these protests, I think, are starting to tap into that sentiment because, let's face it, at 9.1% unemployment, you've got a lot of people who have started to fall into depression because this has been sustained now for a couple of years.
I think the press calls it the Twitter revolution, and it's kind of interesting how technology has made a big difference. Now, I think what brought a lot of us to this country was the very fundamental opportunity presented by the system. The chasing the American dream, if you will. If you worked hard, you knew you could succeed. You could succeed, and success needs to be rewarded. So I think, again, going back to what we were talking a little earlier, this whole Obama talk about distribution of wealth is causing some of this, frustrations to be aired more openly and more freely, and of course technology